What's up, YouTube? Capital G here. We're talking about and revisiting Pot of Cupidity. And the reason that we're doing this topic and the reason that we're discussing this card is because this card is seeing a ton of play in the OCG meta. And I don't think that I can remember a card, at least in the last couple of years, that so divided the community on their opinions on it, where, half the people were like, this card is junk, it's just not worth playing. And then other people like me were like, yeah, I can definitely see some upsides in this card, and it might be a little niche with a couple of decks being able to be built around the concept of banishing cards, and then the card just comes out of nowhere and just seems meta playing like everything, because that's what's currently happening in Japan right now. Now I know you guys have seen some other YouTubers do topics on this video. Most notably, I think Lithium was the one that really caught on to the trend. But if you look at the OCG now, and it is, I'm not gonna lie, it's trickled down a little bit, but if you look at the OCG, and I've been looking at these deck lists on YG Organization pretty much over the past 3 weeks or so. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be a one-time thing. Like, the first week after the Dark Illusion comes out, okay, maybe everybody's running through Pot of Cupidities, and then after that, they're like, this card sucks, nobody plays it anymore. But, we're a little bit removed since the set coming out. You see right here, this is DDD. We've got first card, 3 Pot of Cupidities. Let's keep on going. You've got freaking Mass Heroes. This is a 40-card deck, by the way. We see 3 Pot of Cupidity in here, and these decks are actually like topping. We see Blue Eyes, three Pot of Cupidity in there, and then we've got Metaphosis, which this deck has been running 3 Pot of Cupidities for a couple of weeks now. If you have been living under a rock, maybe you don't know what it does. I'll just read it because it's only one line of text pretty much. You banish the top 10 cards of your deck face down. That's the activation, that's the requirements, that's the cost. And then you draw 2 cards. You can only activate 1 Pot of Cupidity per turn. So you can look at the card and you can see that it is an automatic +1, which is just really good because that's equivalent to something like Pot of Greed or Pot of Avarice. And we know how prominent those cards were in the meta. And unlike some of the other draw cards that, can be +1s, things like the Card of Demise, or, well, it's not a +1, but Pot of Duality, this doesn't really have any restrictions on what you can do after you activate it. Those cards, they stop you from special summoning, they stop you from being able to, do battle damage throughout the turn. Card of Demise makes you discard cards during the end phase, although you can kind of circumvent that. Pot of Cupidity, once you activate it, you can just do whatever the hell you want to your opponent after the fact. You can special summon 15 times. You can do, OTKs and FTKs if you want, but people cannot get over, and I still look at the fact that you have to pretty much give up a quarter of your deck, maybe less, because some people are now running 45 card decks to incorporate this, or they're going beyond 40 cards to try and make this, the damage that this card inflicts not so heavy to themselves. But you still do have to banish 10 cards face down, and the bigger thing about that is it's pretty much outside of your Necroface and a few other cards, it's pretty much impossible to get those cards back into your deck. At least by conventional means, it's just not going to happen. So there are the options of, potentially banishing those 1-ups, because the thing about all of these decks is, yeah, a lot of these decks will run cards that are 3-ups and stuff like that, but there's still the potential to banish the 1-ups, the Soul Charges and, the Solemn Warnings, and it's like, damn, you're never going to get those cards back. You're never going to be able to use them in a duel. But at the same time, I can completely understand if somebody says, well, Cap, what if that card is 6 cards deep into your deck and, you're not guaranteed to get it? Who knows if you're guaranteed to live that long anyway? So it's what you don't have won't necessarily hurt you. I understand that side of the argument, but I want to talk about this in the context of the TCG, because some people have been making, I want to say, a silly argument. They've been saying, well, it's just because Japanese players like to go ham. They don't give a fuck. What does that even mean? If I've learned anything from playing this game, I would say, competitively, although not so competitively now, but competitively since GX through, the beginnings of the Arc V era, it's that, trends from the OCG, if they're not directly tied into cards that we don't have in the OCG, or cards that are, different ban lists and whatnot, those trends generally transfer to the TCG. You can even look at examples throughout history of decks that came from the OCG that came to the TCG, and we didn't even have at full power. People still played. They still made huge impacts. The first 2 that pop into my mind were Synchro Cat and Performages and Pals. When those decks came from the OCG to the TCG, we already knew what they looked like. We already knew how powerful they were. But we didn't even have all the cards to run them. You know, when before Magicians and Pals came to the TCG, we didn't have Shockmaster, we didn't have Elder Entity Azeroth, but people still ran the deck, and it was still, you know, like arguably tier 0. I'm just gonna say it was tier 0. You know what I mean? The same thing with Synchro Cat. So it's like trends like that aren't directly tied to OCG exclusive cards or, you know, the ban list in the OCG. They generally translate. So I can't really see people saying, well, it's just because Japanese players are more aggressive. Like, that doesn't even make sense. You know what I mean? So I look at this card and I'm like, man, if right now people are playing this in like half of decks, you know, as a 3 of, I think that's something that could definitely translate over to the TCG. It's also worth mentioning that people are playing Pot of Cupidity in pretty much every archetype under the sun. It doesn't seem to matter whether the archetype actually has natural synergy with banishing cards or takes advantage of, you know, potentially banishing. People are just throwing this in there to get that automatic +1. And Pot of Cupidity, at right now, it does appear to be a 3 or a 0. Like, you're either running the card at 3 or you're just not running it at all. And I don't think that the thought process is we want to use more than one Pot of Cupidity in a duel. I think that it's more or less we want to make sure that we see it. Even if we're running a 45 card deck, we want to potentially be able to get to the card, you know, every single duel to get that +1 to put us in a commanding position to win the duel or to bring us back into the game. So Pot of Cupidity is, I think that it's a very polarizing card right now. I want to know what you guys' opinions on mainly the TCG. Like, do you guys think that this card will have a big impact on the TCG? And for those of you guys who were just non-believers, who were just like, man, this card sucks, I don't actually fault you, because even if you say that it's still, I still completely understand that point of view, because we're just not conditioned as duelists to give up 10 cards from our deck, even though the deck isn't necessarily a resource, because, you know, it's just, it doesn't really matter whether you have 10 cards or 50 cards in your deck. You know, your chance of winning is probably still, you know, pretty similar. I just don't think that we've ever had a card like this. I don't think that we're conditioned as duelists to be able to, you know, take the hit of banishing 10 cards. The only thing that was like this was 6 cents, and it was gone in a flash. So for those of you who still think that this card is butt, I still completely understand. But has this changed your opinion on Pot of Cupidity? Do you guys think that this card will have an impact in the TCG now that it has had a profound impact in the OCG, at least the small sample size that we have? Thank you guys for watching, as always.